Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to tonight's reading. You might have noticed that the transmission stopped, as it does from time to time out here in Govardhan. Even though we're hotspotting off of a Geo, SIM card, and it's the best connection, even Geo sometimes gets overwhelmed if a lot of people are using it all at once. So anyway, here we are, back live. And we stopped, the transmission stopped at 3:22:23. So we're going to read 3:22:24 and read for a few more minutes, and then we're going to have our reflections. So here we go. We're right in the middle of this wonderful conversation between Kardama and Swayambhuva Manu. And actually the conversation is finished, and Devahuti has been given by Swayambhuva Manu to Kardama Muni as his wife. Okay, text 24. Thus relieved of his responsibility by handing over his daughter to a suitable man, Swayambhuva Manu, his mind agitated by feelings of separation, embraced his affectionate daughter with both his arms. Purport. A father always remains in anxiety until he can hand over his grown-up daughter to a suitable boy. A father and mother's responsibility for children continues until they marry them to suitable spouses. When the father is able to perform that duty, he is relieved of his responsibility. Text 25. The emperor was unable to bear the separation of his daughter. Therefore tears poured from his eyes again and again, drenching his daughter's head as he cried, "My dear mother, my dear daughter." Purport. The word Amba is significant. A father sometimes addresses his daughter in affection as mother, and sometimes as my darling. The feeling of separation occurs because until the daughter is married, she remains the daughter of the father. But after her marriage, she is no longer claimed as a daughter in the family. She must go to the husband's house, for after marriage, she becomes the property of the husband. According to Manu Samhita, a woman is never independent. She must remain the property of the father while she is not married, and she must remain the property of the husband until she is elderly and has grown-up children of her own. In old age, when the husband has taken sannyas and left home, she remains the property of the sons. The woman is always dependent, either upon the father, the husband, or the elderly sons. That will be exhibited in the life of Devahuti. Devahuti's father handed over responsibility for her to the husband, Kardama Muni. And in the same way, Kardama Muni left home, giving the responsibility to his son, Kapiladev. This narration will describe these events, one after another. Okay, so we're going to stop the reading now and take reflection. This is a very, very important section of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, because it gives so much knowledge about the Vedic social structure and the duties and the mentality and relationships and feelings that cultured people had for one another, devotees. When Srila Prabhupada went to the West, he was shocked to see how things were, because when he left in 1965, India, it was still fairly much better preserved than it is now. Still going away, but much better than it is now. Therefore, when he saw how the men and women in the West, mixed freely, and there was no these rules didn't apply, then he didn't break the rules, but he bent them, and he, took disciples girl disciples, and some of them were married, some of them were not, and if they weren't, he got them married. And, at least if they were living together when they, like Shamasundar and what's her, and Malati, Malati, and others that were, either living together or boyfriend and girlfriend, he would get them married. But some that didn't have boyfriends or girlfriends, he kept them in brahmachari and brahmacharini ashrams and engaged them fully in preaching. And there's many purports in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where Prabhupada accepts the women who are preaching on the equal level as men. So, in the West, it's not possible to reinstate the Vedic culture in exactly the same level as it was then. It's just not possible. But, as Prabhupada said, we must try our best to try to follow in as best we can. But we'll have to accept concessions and compromises, in our society. Okay, so let us have some reflections. That was a kind of reflection of mine as we were reading. I was thinking of how Prabhupada dealt in the West with the Westerners, and he was not as rigid as is being described here, but at the same time he gave us the principles and the ways of honoring. Whether or not we could follow, that's another thing. But his instructions were there. And with generations to come, it will happen more and more until it becomes more prevalent, these principles. It wasn't, one reflection I had was that when Prabhupada talks about, the woman being the property of, the father, it's not that it's meant to be like a dog or a slave, that you could hear, you could see by the response of Kardama, of Swami Bhuvamana when he was giving his daughter, he just broke down, and because he had so much affection, some natural affection for her. And so in one hand you could say, the daughter never selects her own husband, but at the same time she fixed her heart on a husband by hearing from Narada Muni, so she actually did, and the husband fulfilled that desire. So these things, it's subtle, it's nuanced, it's subtle. We have to take a lot of things into consideration when consider how to apply the instructions of Srimad-Bhagavatam into our lives. And of course, the prominent feeling, or the prominent point about this pastime is that, the Lord in the heart of all of them, of Swami Bhuvamanu, of Kardama Muni, of Devahuti, he's there organizing this whole thing because he knew the desire of Kardama Muni was to have a ray of Vishnu as was described in this verse, and he agreed to appear, as his son. So we should always factor that in, when we hear these pastimes of Devahuti and Kardama Muni before Kapila was born. Okay, let's have some reflections. I'll shut up. I'm hogging the show over here. Hare Krishna. Anybody have questions? Anybody have reflections? You're hearing a lot, huh? Right from the beginning.
I'm not sure how much you get.
Anyway, you can't get it all at once. Don't expect too much of yourself, Hare Krishna. Yes, we have a question from Jai Shri from Hong Kong, who just arrived today.
Yes, this morning. We are talking about a perfect marriage in the Vedic culture. It works out perfectly according to all the culture, traditions, and
Yes.
whatsoever. It seems that marriage is not working nowadays.
Yeah, not according to this.
Yeah, in the I mean, in society as a whole, as you mentioned, women and men, they are mixing together freely, so it doesn't work out, marriage.
Yes.
But even among devotees, I have to say,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I have to say, even among devotees, we are supposed to know the tradition, how to deal with marriage, and but it seems it doesn't work out also, in many cases.
So this should not disturb anyone, because the pool of persons that are coming to the movement are already culturally bereft. That always has to be factored in, and we have to see into the future according to the vision of persons who are actually Trikalagya, who Prabhupada was. Now we have some information recently of the millennials, brand new, the newest generation coming up. They are beginning to change, meaning that they're marrying and they're staying together more. They're taking less drugs. They're having less illicit sex. They're having less illegitimate children. They're bringing down that percentage of divorce. At least in America, these are the latest statistics that are coming out.
Among devotees?
No.
Overall.
Overall.
Yeah.
So as that changes, as the social, because these things happen in cycles. They happen in cycles, and you have to see it in a larger perspective. Otherwise, you'll see something wrong with devotees, but it's not like that. The devotees, no.
I'm just wondering, because devotees are supposed to know the...
No, this is wrong.
It's wrong.
This is wrong. Yes, devotees are supposed to know these things, but you can't expect in one generation for devotees to come to anywhere close to this standard to change like that. This will take many generations. And in the meantime, we're pioneers, and we, have to do the needful. We have to try our best, we have to do the needful, and that's why I'm personally promoting the reading of these books. Because one of the reasons that devotees are not following is they're not reading the books anymore. And even some of them that do, they are reconsidering after they read them, because they're thinking it's too hard, or they're not, as attractive as they thought they were. Because it's very hard, to live a pure life in these circumstances of the modern Western civilization. So Prabhupada gave an example, a very, very interesting example. He said, when Ajamil, who was a Brahmana, and it was more closer to the Vedic culture, and he had a spiritual master, and he was serving a spiritual master. He was going into the forest to get firewood, and he came upon a couple preparing to have sex, and he couldn't get it out of his mind, even though he was a loyal, innocent, pure-hearted person, and he couldn't get it out of his mind, and therefore eventually he succumbed, and he invited that woman in to be, and he was married to a very cultured girl, and they had a nice marriage, and he brought her in as a maidservant, and the obvious happened, and he ended up taking her and leaving the the qualified wife, and having so many illegitimate children, and taking up nefarious activities in order to maintain her according to her desires and demands. And so Prabhupada said, and then it was only one Ajamil. There was hardly anybody doing that kind of thing in those days. So he said the young men and women who are out here in the West, going out on the streets and distributing books and doing all the things that we do to restrain themselves is so difficult. It's very difficult. So to expect that there's going to be some purity on the level of this culture now, it's not realistic. It really isn't realistic. So therefore, Prabhupada asked us not to become disappointed or discouraged or, to think these kinds of thoughts. To understand more deeply how long it's going to take. It's going to take, to put it in proper perspective, according to Shastra and according to Prabhupada, it's going to take 5,000 years for the Krishna consciousness movement to become at its peak of influence in the world. And then for 5,000 years it will gradually decline. And even then, he didn't say that everyone's going to become devotees. He just said that if a certain percentage becomes, even 5%, even 1%, 1% of 7 billion is 70 million.
Yeah, okay.
1% of 7 billion is 70 million, or 7 million. One, Dr. Matt, you're a mathematician. No, oh boy, I thought you were. Anyway, 1% of 7 billion, it's either 7 million or 70 million. 70 million,
Yeah.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So if even 70 million devotees come out, the world will change significantly. So now how many are there? Not so many. We don't even have a census, so we don't know. But there's, I mean, if you count all the devotees in India and all the devotees all over the world, it may be up to 1 million, maybe. Followers, I'm not talking about initiated. Initiated, no more than 100,000. And when Prabhupada left, it was only 5,000. He initiated 5,000, approximately 5,000. And you know, I wonder if Hannah's watching. Anyway, Hannah made a joke to me. She somehow or other she became so attached to me so quickly. I couldn't understand it, and she couldn't understand it, and nobody could understand it. It's not normal. You know, you saw her, you met her. She's extraordinary. Even Vilas Manjari from Australia, who came the other night, was speaking about how inspired she was from hearing the reflections and questions of Hannah. So Hannah's 18 years old, right out of high school. And it is within the realms of possibility, because it's been quite a bit more than 18 years that, you know, devotees have left this world. It's very possible that she was a devotee before. And then she read this article of mine about my mother leaving, and that she left in 1997. 1997 is 21 years. 21 years.
Yeah.
She's 18. So she's thinking, maybe, you know, I was your mother in my last life, because I can't imagine how come I'm so attached to you. And I said, you know, Hannah, I think now you've gone too far. Let's just cool down. But you know, even though that's far-fetched, even that's a lot of years in between, so it's probably, that's not true. But still, the fact of becoming a devotee and having some experience at least in devotional service, you know, going to a festival or getting a book or seeing the devotees and getting attracted. Like there's another devotee who started to come around. Her name is Lily, and she lives not far from the temple. And when she was a little girl, just little girl this high, she would sometimes wander into the temple with the shoes on. And some of the older Indian ladies would shoo her away, like, you know, that's just the way they are, you know. But she didn't become turned off. She liked the atmosphere, even when she was a little girl, because she was so innocent. And then later on she came, and gradually now she's becoming a devotee. So, it's not that we can make a hard and fast rule and come to conclusions about individual devotees, this and that. But the principle is definitely true, that that's the way Krishna consciousness will spread. We don't know how many people have been reading these books. You know, 500 million books have been distributed by the BBT since it started. 500 million. That's a lot of books. And devotees who see that many books being distributed and then start to doubt, well, yeah, but where are the devotees? And What about what's the potency of these books if there's only no? It's not going to be like that. That's not realistic. It's a rare person who can take to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
Prabhupada never said that it would be like that. Okay, so that's one aspect of this, cultural perfection that we're reading about in the Bhagavatam. This is the beginning of the universe. A question, hold on.
Question from Rati Manjari.
How do you go, Rati?
I just want to say thank you, Rati, for helping me monitor the stream here. It helps out a lot. She says, I have all respects for the words and principles of the Bhagavatam, but I must say that on this topic, my own life's experience growing up without a caring father, actually without a father, has been very different from what I hear today. How can we, in the midst of Kali Yuga, make the best use of this knowledge?
Well, Rati, I think we were just discussing it. I think that the question that Jayashree brought up and the answer I just gave and the discussion we were having about it actually answers your question. We've already answered the question. We can't expect to be like the books are, but we can, if we are honest and sincere, and if we hear these books and realize that there was a time on this planet when the culture was so elevated, and we can aspire, and that's all we can do. And even if we can't be up to that standard, we can aspire to ourselves as an individual person to follow the instructions given to us by our founder Acharya, which is to follow the regulator principles and chant 16 rounds a day minimum. And he's told us, and Prabhupada is not an ordinary person. Prabhupada is not an ordinary person. He doesn't say anything lightly. Everything that he says is so powerful and potent and not whimsical that he always refers to scripture before he gives his conclusion. And as we were just saying, he never told us that it would be such that many people will become devotees in the earth at once. It's what Krishna says in the Gita. Manushanam sahasreshu kaschit yadati siddhaye yaditam api siddhanam kaschin mam veditattva. Out of many millions of people, hardly one will even endeavor for perfection, and even out of millions of those, Prabhupada would say, who have achieved perfection and actually perceived that they're not the body and are fixed in self-realization, hardly one understands Krishna in truth. So these people were all self-realized, the persons we're talking about, that we're hearing about in the Bhagavatam. So we should not feel discouraged, even if we've had, completely different experience when we were born and raised and in our family life and in our marriages or whatever. That should not be a discouragement, because the Vedas are giving us model, and now we have to work cooperatively and try our best, and we shouldn't be discouraged, if it's difficult. What to say? How hard does a person have to work to become perfect or elevated or expert at anything in this world nowadays? Whether you be a computer programmer or an entrepreneur or an opera singer or a world-class athlete or whatever, or a doctor, in this age. It is so competitive and so difficult, so what to speak of attaining perfection in spiritual life? We think it's going to be easy? No. And therefore, just because it is difficult, we shouldn't, give up hope or not be encouraged. Rati, honestly, now I'm speaking to you now personally. I've watched you on the video as you go out by yourself with your little harmonium or something, and you go out and sit by yourself on a park bench somewhere and chant, and sometimes you just meet a very nice person, and I mean, it's so exalted. So whatever you're thinking about yourself and your history and whatever you happened in your life, the fact that you're even doing that, the fact that you got the training from Tamal Krishna Maharaj that you did, and are now taking shelter the way you are in reviving your Krishna consciousness, it's so exalted and it's so inspirational, to so many people. So, all I can say is, Rati, hang in there. It's the way to understand it. Prabhupada, listen what Prabhupada did. He came to Lower East Side, New York, 1965. Haight-Ashbury, 1967. It's inconceivable. And yet so many joined and so many spread Krishna consciousness around the world. And therefore, if we're empowered by Prabhupada, if we can just gather our wits about us and put Srila Prabhupada's books back in the center of our lives, right? Then we can do wonderful things from wherever we are, whoever we are. And not to measure it by some ideal, self-imposed standard that will cause us to be discouraged. We should never become discouraged. Hare Krishna. Hey, Radhi, what do you think? You going to write something?
She says, yes, we can aspire. That's nice. She says that's very true. It is a worthy goal to endeavor for. And then she followed by saying, you're my inspiration.
Well, Radhi, the feeling's mutual. You're my inspiration also, because I'm watching you come from, from a person who had, wouldn't say given up Krishna consciousness. You never gave up Krishna consciousness, but it was a rough hoe. It was a rough road to hoe that you went through, losing your husband, losing your spiritual master. What can we expect? It's very difficulty. And now you're coming out a star, an inspiration to so many people. Just keep up the good work. And I will do my part, and I will keep reading the Bhagavatam every day to you, for the rest of my life, just to make sure that somebody, comes on board and takes up Krishna consciousness seriously. Never, ever underestimate the power of this Srimad-Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings of Prabhupada and his influence, and the desire of Lord Chaitanya, the promise of Lord Chaitanya. Just like when Arjuna asked to see the universal form of Krishna, he didn't realize what he was getting into. Be careful what you ask for. And then Krishna showed him, and he saw all the armies just going into the mouth of the universal form and getting gnashed by his teeth. And then Krishna said, yes, I am time, and I've come here to destroy all, except for you, the Pandavas, and a few others. Everyone else here is going to be killed on this battlefield. That's my will, to restart the order, the sovereignty of the earth, and get it going back in the right direction. Only God can do that. So like that, because he said it, it was already done. And then finally Arjuna said, oh, all right. And he surrendered and he said, whatever you say, and he did, and he was empowered by Krishna, and they won, and the rest is history. So now Lord Chaitanya said, this movement will spread to every town and village of the earth. That is not an idle promise. It's happened. Just look, in just 500 years, what's happened. And just in the last 50 years, what's happened. It's miraculous. How many people know about Krishna? When I went to high school in the early 60s, and grammar school in the 50s, nobody had heard about Krishna. I hadn't even heard the name. And now he's practically a household word. The word karma, reincarnation. People talk about this, in a day-to-day life. Anyway, it's my karma. It's been something I did in my last life. yoga, everything, you know. It's just how fast it's spreading is miraculous. And it's going to keep doing that because all the people who got the books, all the people who came to our festivals, all the people that heard Rati Manjari singing in the park, you know, they got something. And if they, in their next life, they got piety, they got human life, and they will be more favorable. And it will just keep going like that. And we don't know, we don't have a picture. The Prabhupada didn't give us an explicit picture of what it's going to be like 5,000 years from now. But we can be sure of one thing. 5,000 years is a long time. And there's a lot of things that's going to happen between now and then. Your whole civilizations are going to come and go. I'm going to plug this book now. Hi, I'm Kesava Bharati Dasa Goswami, and I'm reading this book. And this is like Oprah, you know, book review. I'm reading Devahuti Swami's book, Searching for Vedic India. It's been around for quite some years, but I just got around to reading it, and I'm telling you, it is profound. The knowledge that's contained herein of the history of India, the history of the study of India since in the modern days, and it should be required reading for all frontline preachers. So all of you out there that are frontline preachers, and everybody who's this attached to the Bhagavatam to hear every night like this, is at least on the way to become a frontline preacher, if not a frontline preacher already. And I highly recommend this book, Hare Krishna. Don't stop reading Prabhupada's books, but this is an important book. Okay, I'm going to stop now. It's getting late. I got up at before 3, and I've been going all day almost, and I need to take rest to rejuvenate myself for tomorrow, as the rest of us do also. So thank you very much. All glories to Devahuti and Kardama and Swayambhuva Manu and Lord Vishnu and the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Brinda ki jai. Go Premanandi. We'll see you tomorrow night.